Hello and welcome to the Rogue Health Economist livecast. I'm your host, James Maskell. It is Chronic Disease Week, and I'm super excited to welcome here a special guest, and we're going to be talking all about what it takes to reverse a chronic illness. Yesterday, we heard about the costs, the causes, the pre-stage, and today we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of what it takes to reverse chronic illness. And I'm super excited to welcome not only someone who knows all about that from working in medical clinics and also, from her own experience, but also someone who's part of the team here at Find Functional. Welcome, Kristi Criswell. Welcome, Kristi.
Hi, thank you for having me, James. Excited to be here.
Yeah, it's great to dive in with you here today. So let's just start with a little bit of your story. We're going to be talking about chronic disease reversal, and I know that's been a pretty consistent theme for you for the last little while. So let's just start with why this came across your plate and what you've been up to for the last few years.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know, about 8 or 9 years ago, really noticed my health declining, a lot of pain, basically your fibromyalgia set of symptoms, those pain symptoms, TMJ and migraines and all of those things that just made me feel like I was way too old for my actual age, not wanting to get out of bed, but still having to be a parent and go through working and school and whatnot. And I had my family physician at that time discovering functional medicine and suggesting that I go down that route. And that's exactly what I did. And through a lot of trials and tribulations and trying to figure out how in the world to make such big lifestyle changes, I figured it out. And my health just took a drastic upward curve. And I decided that I wanted to help other people.
So I want to dig into that phrase you just said, I figured it out, because I think a lot of people, are maybe either figuring it out or not figuring it out, but it's kind of on them. And ultimately, I think we may be making it difficult for people to reverse a chronic illness, or more difficult than it needs to be, because they have to figure it out. So what were the things that sort of came from you that you think the average person doesn't necessarily do?
Goodness. Well, and it was really through my experience that I went to my doctor and said, hey, I think that there's a different way here, rather than letting people go out and struggle through it on their own. For me, it's almost like the process of grief, right? I went through the anger. I crumpled up my diet and threw it across the room at some points, just frustrated with, I don't know, I feel like I've been cooking just fine. And yet now I've got to completely change that. And how do I do that? And relearning something that seemed already second nature to me, meaning how to feed myself and my family. And so I really felt like we could take this to an area where that struggle didn't have to be ongoing, and we could make it easier for people to figure out how to make these changes for themselves, be successful, and get on that road to better health faster.
So yeah, tell us, what did that end up happening in the doctor's office there?
And that's who I ended up working for. And she would often joke about how angry of a patient I was for a while. She tried to help me as much as she could, but, with her time is limited between patients. And so it was difficult to figure out, well, what are the dairy alternatives, and how do I cook without eggs, and how do I give up sugar and carbs, and oh my gosh, look at all these things that sugar's in, even that education, how to go to the grocery store anymore. Those kinds of things are the tips that she couldn't spend the time with me to give me that kind of information and to help me through that. So that is the struggle that I had to learn on my own. And going online, looking, Pinterest was actually a big help for me at that point, because there's so many people there that are posting specific recipes and things, but it was really a learning curve.
It sounds like, one thing is learning the information, and then another thing is kind of dealing with the trauma associated with like all of the things that you've been told forever that have been like inadvertently harming you. And it's not like there's someone to help you do that either, right?
Right, exactly. There's, as far as the education piece, along the lines of eggs they're not inherently bad food, but my body didn't like them, and trying to get through that trauma and that understanding. And, also you got to look at food as being a comfort, food as being a family tradition, food, all of those types of aspects of how food comes into it, and being the one at the table to say, no, I can't have the lasagna that we're used to having every year at this time, or whatever that might be. So there's definitely that trauma piece and that emotional piece.
So when was it that you sort of made the decision that, like, okay, you were well, like the oxygen mask was on yourself, and that you wanted to start helping others to put on that same mask?
Really, it was about the time that my perspective changed to, this is a lifestyle change. I'm really starting to feel better. I can notice that, I want to get out of bed. I've got energy. I don't have a headache uh, constantly anymore. And really honing in and being mindful of how I felt, to then translate that into, this is a lifestyle change. I feel a lot better. And around that education, that of what it means to have, what sugar actually does, and the inflammatory process, and that kind of thing. Those two things coupled together made me realize that I really wanted to make this a lifestyle change.
And how did it affect yourself, the rest of your family?
Uh, Great. My husband also jumped on board. And so, it was combining how to cook for him with how to cook for me, wrapped my kids into it. They're a little bit harder as teenagers to make, have them follow that, but helping educate them and helping educate my whole family. And now, we all feel a lot better.
Beautiful. So just, yeah, I guess just to lay it out as clearly as possible, like what were your diagnoses that you had, and what is your health like today?
Diagnose. I hesitate to use that word around fibromyalgia, because I don't think that that's a diagnosis. I think that that's really a set of symptoms. But for lack of a better word, I had that label, as well as chronic headaches, chronic fatigue. Some discussion in there with Epstein-Barr virus. So um, now, so all of those things put together where I was.
Yeah.
Now I don't lay in bed with my legs aching. I don't clench my jaws. I don't have the horrible ringing in my ears or tinnitus from the TMJ. And it's rare for me to have a headache. And I sleep so much better. Absolutely, also.
Great. So yeah, so now take us through like the first stages in sort of creating, I guess, what, maybe 5 or 10 years ago was like a new model. Certainly my business partner, Gabe Hoffman, when I met him, he was a health coach working in a functional medicine doctor's office. And a lot of the things that we've done over the last 10 years were built on kind of like the early days of really understanding what that dynamic looked like. And I know that you spent a long time working in that dynamic and sort of working through different aspects of that dynamic. So, tell us a little bit about that story.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So when my family doctor, who became the doctor I worked with, like I've mentioned, when she started discovering functional medicine, for her, it was about the health of her husband and trying to figure out what was going on with him, although all of his test results were quote unquote normal in the world of a typical Western medical doctor. And she started discovering in the world of food sensitivities and viral loads, and started discovering these things. It was at the time that she came across the Institute for Functional Medicine and started attending those conferences, that she really had her own paradigm shift in practicing medicine. And that's about the same time that I came on to work with her as a health coach. And so as she was going through those modules and those conferences, she would come back with the learning, and we would start implementing those tools little by little, to the point where we created a system of how it was that I best work with her and sit in on appointments with her. And we take our her patients through for the protocols that she would do. And so I started learning a lot more about those with her.
So compare and contrast
Yeah.
your own experience of being like a patient of hers to
Mm-hmm.
now the experience of new patients at the office where you were now involved, and what part was falling on you and what part was falling on the doctor, and how did the dynamic change?
Yeah, absolutely. Night and day as far as me being a patient. With me being a patient, it was much more doctor directed, step A, step B, step C. And with me as a health coach, it became much more patient centered, much more about them and their story, where they came from, what they've been through, where they are now, both on a triggering event, an emotional trauma type history, as well as physical signs and symptoms. So really sitting down and looking at their timeline, going through that process with them, meeting them where they are, creating however big or small goals and action steps that we needed to for them, their success. And I can't tell you how many times I've had somebody tear up just because somebody was listening to them for the first time and really understanding and playing on their strengths in order to be able to implement these things.
And what were the sort of range of conversations you were having with people? I mean, obviously food is a big piece in helping
Mm-hmm.
them execute on these new food pieces. But what were some of the other things that came up around, either around food or not to do with food, that they ended up falling on your shoulders?
Um, One word comes to mind, and that's stress. It everything would boil back down to a stress load, whether or not it was a sleep issue, or just a self-care issue. Most things boil down to stress. And we talked a lot about that. And we talked a lot about mindfulness and getting to a point of having good self-care. There were so many patients that would do everything that we talked to them about doing with regard to food or supplementation or any other types of treatment. And there were times where, maybe get a little bit better, but not great. And we started going deeper and talking about that stress component. And even if it was just that the patient made a decision or executed something with regard to whatever that biggest stressor was in their life, all of a sudden their health just started getting enormously better faster. And so that is something that resonated with me a lot, was that stress component.
Yeah, and I can see how many different areas of our lives have stress. There's like money stress, there's emotional stress, there's learning, all of these things
Mm-hmm.
need to be unpacked. One of the things that we've spoken about, internally with Fine Functional is just, what does it take to kind of wrestle the locus of control in your relationship with medicine back to yourself, where obviously it's been given away to all kinds of doctors and specialists that are coming to save you, and then sort of stepping into your own sovereignty and authority around your own health. Can you talk about like what role you've played in that, and how you've seen that to play out in reversal of chronic disease?
Right, absolutely. I think there's so many patients in discovering their story of how many different doctors that they had been to prior to finding us, and different specialists, and very Western trained medicine that would, very directive, and they didn't feel heard and they didn't feel supported. And to be able to come to us and get those things, I think my role was the most crucial part of that as a coach, to say, okay, here are the recommendations. How can we make you successful?
Yeah.
And working directly with the patient like that. And it made, I believe, the biggest difference in the world, that they in fact could implement these things and then they saw results. I've gotten so many wonderful, heartfelt thank yous and gratitude from people that, God, I've been at this for 10, 20 years, and I've been seeing you for 6 months to a year, and I feel so much better.
Yeah.
And, the difference is huge.
And it sounds like what the difference isn't is better information in a lot of cases. It's just actually like the application of that information into the daily life. And what is it actually going to take
Mhm.
to do this kind of stuff consistently? And it feels to me that is the sort of the gap, the missing link that needs to be filled if we're going to facilitate chronic disease reversal at any sort of scale.
Right. It's all about the implementation and making it successful for the individual person.
Yeah. So, obviously here at Fine Functional, the vision here is really to think things differently, right? Which is to think about the primary relationship should be with someone who can help you to execute healthy behaviors ongoing. And then we can dip into the expertise of the doctor if and only if, executing healthy behaviors consistently isn't getting us where we need to go. And there needs to be new information. So the doctor sits in the spot that they're comfortable in. The patient is now supported by the person who can really help them with behaviors. And this has just been, for me, sort of understanding what's happening in these functional medicine doctors' offices and thinking, I think we're doing this kind of the wrong way around. And I would just love to get your thoughts on that, because ultimately, it's a paradigm shift even in the delivery of functional medicine, and I'm super aware of that. But it's just been like staring at me in the face, I feel, for the last 10 years, and I've really wanted to sort of go after it a little bit.
Right. And absolutely. Every time we had a new patient come in, I was the one that spent a good half hour, 45 minutes with that patient first, and started delving into their story, what it was they're needing, what their current concerns were. Physician then came into the office, and I briefed her to say, this is what we've got, and this is what we've got going, and this is where I see that, and start telling her what I saw, and talking about, well, there's, mentioning there's a lot of sugar, there's a lot of inflammatory things going on. And, or if there was something in her wheelhouse and her expertise to say, yes, and I can see this, and I think that we need this or that test or more data points, then that was her specialty, and that could be ordered. And then I would also sit in and get that explanation, and therefore, any recommendations that she made, then again, my job to help implement. So really starting with me to create that conversation, that trust and rapport, and that relationship that I'm here for them. I'm their personal cheerleader and advocate, and educator to some degree. So that was the primary relationship that was built, and that's what made her program in functional medicine successful at her office.
I totally resonate with that, and I think that's so true. I think there's just sort of like this, hangover of Western medicine where the doctor is first and the most important. Because look, if you get a crazy infection, like, you want to see the best diagnostician straight away because there's something that's about to go down, and you want the best person there. But in lifestyle-driven chronic disease, there's not normally that acuteness that you're dealing with, and this is something that's been going on for a long time and will continue going on for a long time if it's not dealt with. But we're trying to change the trajectory. And I guess one thing I want to follow up there on what you said is that you were able to very quickly share with the doctor what was going on. And what I've seen, the reason why I called my show the Functional Forum, and this is Fine Functional as opposed to integrative, holistic, naturopathic, or other things, like all of these things are well principled and well intentioned. But what struck me about what you just said, which is sort of like part of this, is that you and the doctor spoke a common language, which was the functional medicine operating system. And part of when I first saw it laid out on a piece of paper, and I saw the timeline, and I saw the antecedents, triggers, and mediators, and I saw that piece, I was like, what we really need is a common language. Because in 5 minutes, you were able to give this doctor a sort of like a download that might have taken, without a common language, might have taken an hour to do, because it took you an hour to do it in the first place. And I just love for you to talk into, as being someone who's operated in a system where there has been a common language, what advantages you see that for building, building practitioner teams, and ultimately building efficient systems of chronic disease reversal.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. I think the biggest point of that is that we used common tools. And as she pulled tools back from the Institute for Functional Medicine and shared with me and taught me how to use them, I also then learned more about them at the Functional Medicine Coaching Academy, but that created a common language between us. We shared information back and forth. We were colleagues, and there was a great respect of of information flow from both sides, and having that partnership as a care team, I think, was the biggest benefit there, to have that common language.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I really appreciate you sharing that, because I've from the moment I saw it, I was like, okay, we need to have a common language, because, I know one of the things that's frustrating for patients is going to 6 different providers to help, and every time having to start the whole story off again.
Yeah.
Right. And thinking you're saying the same thing. And if there was just a way for you to be able to say, hey, look, this is my health. Like, this is, where I've been, the uniqueness, how I'm doing with my daily activities. And by the way, here are the different sort of areas in which my function has broken down over time. Like, my vision with this is that any other practitioner could then plug into that, because now we have a common language. And I feel like that's absolutely crucial if we're going to scale up delivery of this kind of care.
Absolutely. And sharing those kind of documentations that are common between, you mentioned, but mediators and triggers and antecedents, things that are on both the personal timeline and the living matrix. Looking at the matrix as there are definitely areas that are much more specific to a practitioner. There are areas of that matrix that are more specific to the coaching relationship, but having that shared document to go back and forth between as part of that common language.
And also, like, you do the intake and you notice, okay, look, structure looks like it's a bit of a problem. Like, this doctor's not an osteopath. I'm not a chiropractor, but there's a good one down the road that we trust. I think it makes sense, given the priorities of what we've seen, for you to go in and have some structural work, because I can see how this lack of correct structure is affecting your function. It's affecting the nervous system. And so then you can, like, use that practitioner strategically, rather than like, well, everyone must get this service, because ultimately you're like, prioritizing that. And I think that's another piece that I think will allow practitioner teams to develop. And you're already starting to see, like in St. Louis, where Kristen Brokaw's been running her, functional medicine meetup for 10 years. They all know each other. They all know what each other does. This person specializes in this and that. And they have a really good, trusted referral base back and forth. And it's built on getting to know practitioners over a period of time. So it's like relationships, common language, community, ultimately, and community delivered care.
Right. Absolutely. And getting these practitioners and these specialties more in a community that the referrals are right there and are easy, is, I think, so essential in this.
Beautiful. Well, Kristi, thank you so much for being here. And any last words on chronic disease reversal, your story, or anything you want to share with our audience before we wrap up here?
I feel like I just want to say, you're not alone. It's absolutely possible. It's absolutely doable. It might look like a big mountain, but you take one step at a time.
Absolutely. Yeah, one step at a time. And, our North Star here at Find Functional, with what we're creating, I mean, look, the Rogue Health Economist show is really about what is it going to take to flatten the costs on healthcare. And, more than just talking about it and advocating for it, which I've been doing for the last 10 years, it's really about building the solution, right? Or building a part of the solution, or building a infrastructure where all the different people who've been working on different parts of the solution can come together with the benefit of the patient. And I certainly am super excited to see the relationships building between, our health advocates on the front lines, who are helping you execute healthy behaviors, who are helping you come into your own sovereignty for your own level of accountability for your own health, and then using the functional medicine practitioner community that is strong and vibrant and growing, and connecting all those pieces together to really create something that could get 100 million people healthy. I mean, that's really our mission here. It's going to take a lot. It's going to take a while, but we've got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
Kristi, I really appreciate, everything that you've done so far. Has been super. Learned a lot already for you. And also thank you for blazing a trail, because, ultimately you could have given up a bunch of times and you would have just been like someone with fibromyalgia in your town, not going out and being extremely susceptible to COVID and, all of those things. And here you are, vibrant and bright, and helping other people in your community, and being a strong part of this group. So I guess I just want to say much respect to you for treading the path that will make it a lot easier for others to tread down the road.
Yeah, It's a very exciting path. Thank you. I love it.
Awesome. So check out if you can work with Kristi at findfunctional.com. You go to findfunctional.com/start if you're watching this. Thank you so much for tuning in. Tomorrow, we're going to be with Dr. Tom O'Brien. He is one of the leaders in functional medicine. He's been lecturing for 20 years on autoimmune disease specifically, and how the unique understanding of physiology affects a whole range of chronic diseases. We're going to be getting deep into chronic disease reversal tomorrow. So tune in tomorrow at 12 o'clock Pacific. Until then, this has been the Rogue Health Economist. I've been here with Kristi Criswell. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.